So I wanted to thank you and so many teachers who have really put the best of their efforts in making sure that their students get the best possible education in foreign languages and in Spanish in particular. And I wanted to let you know that Instituto Cervantes will always be by your side. It is very easy to contact with us. We have our website in here, so whatever help you may need, we have, you know, guided tours through our library. We have programs for your students. And we're strengthening that. So there are lots of options, and we have also a very good library devoted to teaching and to Spanish as a foreign language. So I will start in Spanish now. And en primer lugar, hoy voy a hablarles de algunas cifras del español en el mundo. Voy a hablarles también de la docencia del español como lengua extranjera y de la presencia del español en Internet. Hay otros temas muy importantes que he tenido que sacrificar en esta charla, como es su importancia comercial y económica en el mundo diplomático o en la ciencia y la cultura. Si hay alguna oportunidad, haré alguna breve mención, o si no también durante el tiempo de debate. Y si no, les emplazo a tener otra sesión cuando ustedes quieran. Yo los datos que voy a mencionar hoy y en los análisis están en muy buena parte extraídos de un documento muy útil que es el anuario El Español en el Mundo, que se publica, como dice el propio nombre de anuario, pues cada año, y que este año es especialmente interesante porque va país por país analizando cómo está la situación del español. Entonces, el español en cifras. Determinar el número de hablantes de una lengua y del español en particular en el mundo no es fácil y además es importante, porque es verdad que la importancia percibida de una lengua tiene algo que ver, justa o injustamente, con la extensión de esta lengua. Para nosotros es muy importante como institución saber cuánta gente habla español y qué interés y qué demanda hay para que nuestra estrategia de promoción sea realmente eficaz, ¿no? Y para eso tenemos que tener datos fiables. Por eso venimos publicando este volumen desde 1998. A quien no lo conozca, le recomiendo que lo mire. Si alguien lo quiere, está accesible online, gratis, y hay también una versión impresa. Digamos, ahora mismo, con los últimos datos de este anuario recién publicado, tenemos que en 2021 hay casi 493 millones de personas en el mundo que tienen el español como lengua materna. Y si ampliamos el grupo para incluir a la gente que tiene, además del dominio nativo, un grado de competencia limitada y el grupo de aprendices de español como lengua extranjera, tenemos cerca de 600 millones de habitantes que hablan español, total o parcialmente, que es el 7,5% de la población mundial. Así, el español es la segunda lengua materna del mundo por número de hablantes, después del mandarín, del chino, mandarín, y la tercera lengua en cómputo global, es decir, dominio nativo, competencia limitada y estudiantes de lengua extranjera, después del inglés y del chino mandarín. Está previsto que el número de hispanohablantes siga creciendo en las próximas 5 décadas, pero también está previsto que el peso relativo vaya disminuyendo de manera progresiva de aquí al año 2100, ¿no? En el siglo XXII, solo el 6,3% de la población mundial podrá comunicarse en español. Ahora veremos por qué. ¿Algún dato interesante? En 2060, es decir, dentro de 40 años, el segundo país hispanohablante del mundo por número de habitantes, por número de hablantes, será Estados Unidos, con un 27,5% de población de origen hispano. Será el segundo país después de México, por supuesto. También cabe referir que ha habido un aumento en los últimos años, de 2020 a 2021, de alumnos que estudian español como lengua extranjera en el mundo. Han crecido en 2 millones y son ahora 24 millones de personas. Desde que el Instituto Cervantes se fundó, por tanto, hemos visto que la comunidad hispanohablante ha crecido un 70% en 30 años. Es un crecimiento espectacular, muy significativo, y se debe, desde luego, a la demografía, el aumento de la población de México. Hay alrededor de 1,2 millones más de hablantes al año de español solo en México por nacimientos. Y además se incorporan en buena parte de Latinoamérica, gran parte de la comunidad indígena de esos países también se incorporan paulatinamente a la lengua española sin abandonar sus lenguas nativas. Y luego, fuera de los países tradicionalmente de habla hispana, el principal motor de crecimiento ha sido sin duda Estados Unidos. Pero además estamos contando ahora más hablantes que antes, porque no solamente contamos, como ya he referido aquí, los nativos, sino todos aquellos que tienen pues, esa competencia limitada y también los que aprenden la lengua. En cuanto a las previsiones de crecimiento, bueno, esta pérdida de peso relativo del español va a ser menos acusada, sin embargo, que la del inglés, el chino o el francés. Sin embargo, el árabe va a crecer de un modo muy importante. Se prevé que hasta 2068 el número de hablantes de español en el mundo siga creciendo hasta los 726 millones de personas y a partir de 2068 va a ir bajando por cuestiones de demografía, de proyecciones demográficas, hasta menos de 700 millones para 2100. Yo les he comentado que para 2060 habrá casi un 30% de hispanos en Estados Unidos, 111 millones. Y lo que estamos viendo es que la proporción de hispanos en Estados Unidos que hablan español en estos últimos 30 años disminuye muy poco a poco. Es decir, que está cuestionándose la llamada ley de hierro, según la cual Estados Unidos es un país que solo acepta una lengua, el inglés, porque las terceras generaciones de hispanos están manteniendo en un grado muy sorprendente la competencia en español. O sea que Estados Unidos está dejando de ser un cementerio de idiomas, que es como se le ha llamado, entre otras cosas, sobre todo a causa de esa fuerte impronta de los hispanos y del español. Y además es algo muy llamativo porque las encuestas dicen que hablar español, sin embargo, no es un requisito indispensable de esa identidad hispana o latina, ¿no? Bien. Bien, ahora les hablaré del español, brevemente del español como lengua extranjera, de la docencia del español a quien no tiene ese conocimiento nativo. El español se disputa con el francés y con el chino mandarín, el segundo puesto en la clasificación de idiomas más estudiados como segunda lengua, tras naturalmente el inglés internacional, ¿no? En Estados Unidos, el español es con diferencia el idioma extranjero más estudiado en todos los niveles de enseñanza. Y en la Unión Europea la proporción de estudiantes en primaria y secundaria ha aumentado de manera constante en estos últimos años, en tanto que francés y alemán vienen descendiendo. En Reino Unido, al menos en algunas partes como Inglaterra, en el bachillerato ya es la primera lengua y en la universidad está ahí con el francés y está previsto que a lo largo de esta década también lo supere, dentro de que no es un buen momento para lenguas extranjeras en Reino Unido al francés, mientras que el alemán ha conocido una caída muy importante. Y un dato significativo es que en 18 de los 27 Estados miembros de la Unión Europea y también en Gran Bretaña, por cierto, el español es la lengua que más les gustaría aprender a sus ciudadanos como segunda lengua. Por hacer una pequeña mención a Reino Unido, hay que decir que actualmente algo más del 15% de los estudiantes tienen, de todos los niveles, tienen el español como parte de su currículum, lo que sitúa el total de alumnos por encima de los 2 millones. Está influyendo muy positivamente el hecho desde que de 2014 la enseñanza de una lengua extranjera en primaria es obligatoria. Y si en primaria es muy importante la presencia, en secundaria es realmente aún más sustancial. Prácticamente 9 de cada 10 colegios, tanto privados como públicos, hay 8 de cada 10 en los centros públicos y 9 de cada 10 en los privados, hay docencia de español, y además esa oferta ha permanecido estable, al contrario que la de otros idiomas, y aunque nos movemos en unos números muy pequeños, cabe referir que, por ejemplo, en 2019, por primera vez en la historia, el español fue la lengua más demandada precisamente en A-levels. Y en GCSE también ha aumentado de 2005 a 2020 cerca de un 70%. Bien, voy a saltar ahora a una parte porque yo sé que no tenemos muchísimo tiempo. Quería hablar ya prácticamente por último, aunque luego podemos hablar de otras cosas si ustedes así lo quieren, del español en Internet y en las plataformas digitales, porque creo que esto es algo menos conocido y que a ustedes tal vez les puede interesar. Y son datos, insisto, muy actualizados, ¿no? El español es la tercera lengua de comunicación en Internet después del inglés y del chino. El 8% de los usuarios de Internet se comunica en español. Y además hay un margen de crecimiento, porque en los países hispanohablantes el acceso a Internet es de un 70% de las personas. Es decir, todavía queda un 30% para lograr una plena conectividad, ¿no? Y una cosa muy importante es que el español es la segunda lengua más utilizada en plataformas como YouTube, Facebook, Netflix, LinkedIn, Wikipedia e Instagram, por detrás del inglés y generalmente a gran distancia del portugués y del francés. Un punto muy interesante es el que afecta a la comunidad hispana de Estados Unidos, que prefiere consumir y crear contenidos digitales en español en lugar de en inglés. Hay medios digitales con contenidos destinados especialmente a la comunidad hispana que son en español, como La Tribuna Hispana, Adelante Valle, Democracy Now!, Noticia, Estrella, Diario La Estrella. Y las encuestas nos dicen que los hispanos de Estados Unidos prefieren consumir y crear estos contenidos en español, también en la publicidad, y de hecho los hispanos que se definen como bilingües en español y en inglés, y también aquellos cuya lengua principal es el español, sienten una mayor confianza hacia la empresa que se anuncia cuando la publicidad de esa empresa es en 2 lenguas. Y hay una cosa curiosa, es que aunque una parte importante de los hispanos de Estados Unidos creen que el Spanglish es una forma de representar a las dos culturas que favorece una comunicación informal y relajada, casi la mitad prefiere que se utilice un español sin mezcla, digamos, ¿no? O sea, que quieren que el español sea tratado también con propiedad y con respeto, ¿no? Y hay quien incluso piensa que esa mezcla de inglés y de español no es una opinión, son los datos, puede ser una falta de respeto. Por lo tanto, hay una cierta conciencia lingüística, ¿no? Por dar alguna pincelada de las distintas plataformas. Bueno, en YouTube, 66% inglés, 15% español, 7% portugués. Netflix es difícil de medir debido a las distintas opciones de audio y de subtítulos, pero los pocos estudios que hay sitúan al español en el segundo puesto después del inglés y con una cuota de pantalla que es más del doble que la del francés. Wikipedia es un tema curioso, sin embargo. Yo creo que de alguna manera es una pequeña... Es algo que nos debería hacer reflexionar. Hay 315 lenguas en Wikipedia y sin embargo el español ocupa la 9ª. O sea, mientras en YouTube es la 2ª, en Wikipedia es la 9ª de 3, detrás de, por ejemplo, el neerlandés o el sueco. Esto indica que hay detrás de esas cifras iniciativas públicas o privadas de promoción, ¿no? de la lengua y de la creación en Wikipedia. Pero en todo caso, si tomamos el número de usuarios por lengua, es verdad que el español es la 2ª, por delante del francés, del alemán y del chino y detrás del inglés, pero llama la atención la falta de contenidos que hay en español y el número menor de editores que en francés o alemán. Bien, en Twitter también es la 2ª, en Facebook es la 2ª con 400 millones de usuarios y simplemente para terminar con LinkedIn y con Instagram, en LinkedIn, por el perfil profesional de los usuarios de esta red, es una plataforma ideal para medir la incidencia del español en el ámbito de los negocios. Entonces, 720 millones de usuarios en LinkedIn, 70 millones en español, 55 millones en la América que habla español y otros 13 millones en Europa y el resto en Estados Unidos. El inglés es sin duda la lengua más usada, el español es la 2ª. En todo caso, si bien el número de usuarios hispanohablantes de LinkedIn en Estados Unidos todavía es reducido, si se compara con el número total de habitantes de español, de habitantes que hablan español en aquel país, la distribución geográfica sugiere que el español se está utilizando como un activo profesional, como algo importante para tu carrera laboral, también fuera del ámbito hispanohablante. Y bueno, simplemente a comentar que el inglés, curiosamente, tiene un menor, gana de un modo menos abrumador en Instagram, donde hay mayor, unas lenguas más repartidas, ¿no? Por ejemplo, el ruso es muy importante y el español está delante del ruso en 2ª posición y por detrás del inglés. Well, that was my talk, and if you want to delve into other subjects like the Spanish and trade or Spanish and diplomacy, we can do so later if you wish. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That's very, very good. And we'll come back to some of those points, which is about the digital impact of Spanish and also the crucial role played by the United States in the way that things are going to be changing in the future. So thanks again, Ignacio. That's absolutely fantastic. Today, as you know, what we're doing as well is trying to think about the Spanish A-level and thinking about a way in which we can perhaps enhance the curriculum. This is just some proposals in order to reflect that global importance of Spanish. We want Spanish to be pushing forward with some ideas about its curriculum, which we feel that would be helpful also for other modern languages. So what we did earlier this month is that we looked at 3 possibilities that we would like to think about. One was in filmmaking, to allow students to integrate filmmaking as an essay, as it were, as part of an essay into their Spanish A-level. That was one idea. We also wanted to think about ways in which we could allow STEM students who are studying sciences to continue with their Spanish, and also those who are thinking about economics to continue with their Spanish. We didn't want them to be left, as it were, or left behind in thinking about that. So we thought of those 3 options. And I'm absolutely delighted to have Dr. Owen Williams with us today, who graduated with a PhD on UK film censorship from the documentary track program at UCL. He's taught filmmaking at the undergraduate and MA level at University College London, and as well at the Escuela Internacional de Cine y Televisión in Cuba. He worked previously as assistant head of the academic registry at the University of the Arts, and he now splits his time between providing training for staff in online teaching at the University of London and working as a postdoctoral researcher for the HEIF-UKRI funded project, which is developing a partnership between universities and schools. Owen is going to be speaking to us specifically about one aspect, which is filmmaking. And I'd just like to say, record my thanks to Owen. He's helped me over the years so much in the course that we were co-teaching in Cuba for 10 years, in which we were teaching filmmaking in Spanish. So thanks again, Owen, and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks, Stephen. That's absolutely great, and thanks to everyone for coming along to hear these presentations today. So yeah, as Stephen said, I really wanted to talk to you today around this idea of a new Spanish A-level, how it might incorporate some wider disciplines within the remit of the Spanish A-level to hopefully increase its popularity. And I'm just going to share my screen here with you guys, where I've got a little PowerPoint I want to go through. And if I do the necessary on that, hopefully you can all see filmmaking in Spanish A-level is the topic. So what would this look like? So if we can just have a quick think over the next 20 minutes about how we might incorporate filmmaking into a kind of new model for the Spanish A-level. So the sort of initial thoughts that I've had around this was that filmmaking as an option, as part of the A-level in Spanish, could seek to combine the study of the Spanish language and culture with the study of film form. Now, when thinking through this, the sort of question that immediately arose was, if we're talking about filmmaking in Spanish, what differentiates filmmaking in Spanish from, say, filmmaking in any other language? And you can imagine a course or an option which could explore, how someone like Almodovar uses magical realism and the kind of editing techniques that he uses, which are unique to Spanish language film in some ways, and trying to get students to engage with that and make their own stuff. And frankly, that's too high level for what we're trying to discuss here. So I think really what the idea of this is to use film form, in its relatively sort of basic form, just sort of a consideration of shots, consideration of framing, consideration of editing, to explore the subjects that were explored anyway within the Spanish A-level: the literature, the culture, the speaking, the writing, the understanding, and how the film form itself might be used as an educational tool to kind of further these ends. So the option in that sense would center around the creation of a 5-minute documentary film, which each student would complete as their final summative assessment. Spanish film texts and the formative work of other students, which we'll get to in a moment, would be considered throughout this option in order to inform and interrogate the study of film form within Spanish-speaking themes and contexts. And students would be required to narrate their films in Spanish. This is where the sort of Spanish aspect really comes in and differentiates it from just filmmaking and anything else. Students would be required to narrate their films in Spanish, have a Spanish speaker or a Spanish topic as the subject of their film, use Spanish language assets in their films, and demonstrate a written understanding of Spanish through the creation of subtitles. So through that, we get the reading, the writing, the understanding that we would have had in perhaps the things that it is replacing. So the kind of basic structure of this, and we'll go into all this in much more depth in a moment, would be the idea of studying Spanish film texts, i.e. Spanish-speaking films, completing formative exercises, which I'll elaborate on in a moment, considering the formative exercises of fellow students, so bringing back the work that they're doing week on week, working towards the end, and the summative assessment, and actually considering that in a very round table way, and then completing the summative assessment, which would be perhaps a 5-minute documentary film. As an initial thought, we could obviously think about how long that needed to be. So we're sort of starting from the summative assessment and working our way back in some ways. If we were to look at the AQA Spanish A-level in its current form and what it has, It has, a paper 1, which is the listening, reading and writing paper, that's 50% of the final mark. Paper 2, which is writing, which is the literature and film, which is 20%. And paper 3, speaking, 30%. Now, we could probably leave papers 1 and 3 relatively unchanged, and perhaps, I've gone too far, perhaps think about the paper 2 writing as a filmmaking option. So how about if we introduced another option for paper 2 there, which could be filmmaking in Spanish? Now, by making this quite small change to a course that only counts for 20%, we could entice, hopefully, students, many of whom are A-star students, as the survey that Stephen alluded to earlier that we conducted recently as part of the project that we're conducting. We surveyed a good number of current A-level students, recently graduated A-level students, and many of them are these kind of A-star students who are looking to broaden their horizons as well as study Spanish and gain skills either in STEM, which will be talked about by some other panelists, or in this case, in terms of learning something about film form. So people who intend to explore, film subjects to integrate Spanish into their course of study, essentially. And now we would keep the literature and film options for the traditional students, but increase our student intake, hopefully, by actively promoting the Spanish A-level as an excellent 4th option for students who are also interested, not only in Spanish, but also interested in film. Now, thinking about how that might all work. So the idea that I've come up with is 2 different options for a summative assessment, which all things would work towards in the course. So summative assessment 1, we might call retrato, like a portrait. And this would be interviewing a protagonist, a Spanish-speaking protagonist who students would find and would choose. And they would interview this person, and they would use the various techniques that we're going to teach them throughout the rest of this option to present that person with a knowledge both of their topic, of the person, the interview that they've conducted with the person, but also showing their understanding of film form through the framing of that person, through mise en scène. I'm thinking of very, very basic concepts here, nothing too advanced, but sort of stuff like, if you are filming a vicar, then perhaps film that religious person in front of their altar in a church. Don't film them in a park. If your subject is a mechanic, then you want to be filming those people in a garage with a framing that perhaps has a motorbike that they're working on. Don't film them in a cafe. So very kind of simple, the construction of mise en scène, construction of simple editing, understanding of framing. These kinds of things would come in to creating this film, which would be their summative assessment. And students would be expected to conduct an interview of the subject in Spanish. So students would be expected to engage with the language of film, again, through these formative exercises that I'll get onto in a moment. And students would be expected to provide Spanish subtitles to get a kind of writing component in there as well. Now, there is, of course, I think, an immediate issue that came to mind when I was thinking through this, in that when we have taught this is in some ways an adaptation of the kinds of teaching that Stephen and I have done in the past in Cuba that was referenced earlier. But in those cases, we were teaching adults, and we were teaching adult students who we were okay to just let go into the world, in Havana in that case, and in London when we've taught similar things at UCL. And they're okay to go out and just find their own subjects, being, adults. When you're dealing with A-level students, of course, a number of issues come up with that, where you would want to have engagement, I think, from the school in question with some kind of Spanish-speaking community, so that you had a safe, verifiable pool of people through which students could engage and in a very safe and monitored way could find the protagonists for their film. So schools might want to reach out to other Spanish language teachers, Spanish or Spanish language community centers, Spanish language cultural or arts centers, Spanish language business or business groups, Spanish language religious or charity groups, or language educational centers, to name sort of but a few. But I fear, if I have one fear about this, that this would favor this course, this option being much more viable for metropolitan centers than it would perhaps in the more rural parts of the country. So I think it would be important in this case to have a second option, which could be kind of done anywhere, which I'm calling metraje encontrado, which would be found footage documentary. So a different kind of documentary. In the first instance, they would be doing a summative assessment that was based on a portrait of a person, very much a kind of interview. Think kind of Nick Broomfield, for those of you who are into your documentary, that kind of mode. Here we're talking more of a kind of Adam Curtis kind of documentary, where instead of going out and filming a protagonist, a person, what students would do would be to choose a topic from the wider Spanish A-level and produce that 5-minute documentary based on a found footage film with that topic as its subject. So in this case, what the final film would be assets that the student has gone through the internet and found, perhaps from YouTube or other streaming sites. Perhaps there are documentaries that have already discussed the topic that the student is interested in. Perhaps there are audio files. They would provide their own audio narration. Any kind of images and other sort of film files will be brought together and edited into a filmed essay, essentially, the found footage documentary. So students would be expected to collect, collate, and present Spanish language assets in a documentary film. Students would be expected to have at least 2 minutes of their own Spanish language narration within that documentary film to fulfill the requirement for kind of speaking in this assessment. Students would be expected to engage with the language of film in their portrayal of the subject. And students, again, would be expected to provide a certain amount of subtitling to get some writing component into that assessment to make the two options comparable and commensurate with each other in terms of their learning outcomes and the assessment of them. So with those two different options, I think we could create a summative assessment that spoke to the requirements of the Spanish A-level, particularly that paper 2, which this could replace. Now, excuse me, that summative assessment obviously would be the final outcome of this option. But leading up to that, I would suggest that there'd be a number of formative assessments, which would very much make up the week-by-week running of that option up to the summative assessment point. And those would be a series of very, very short films, in some cases as short as 30 seconds, that students would be doing on a week-by-week basis, that they would then bring back to the class, be presented to the class, be considered by both the teacher and the class to create a kind of discursive framework through which their knowledge of film form grew through their practice of it and seeing what their peers were doing with it. So a number of exercises could be things like a self-portrait, the idea that you can make a little film about what it means to be you, to be yourself, how you might portray that both through a little interview you do with yourself and also through the mise-en-scène of the frames. What are you deciding to film yourself in front of? What kind of editing are you putting behind it? Are you cutting very quickly to insinuate that you're a very busy person who's very on the go? Are you doing the opposite to insinuate that you are more laid back? Considering film form in this way in filming themselves, how to film a protagonist, which obviously could lead on to the summative assessment for those going down that route, which would just be doing a very, very quick 2-minute film on a person of their choosing. Looking at kind of editing and conflict, this would be what would be a kind of montage lesson at a higher educational level. We can kind of strip down to be a very simple choose two opposing frames or frames that juxtapose in a certain way, put them next to each other, and then bring that back to class so that we can then all look at those pieces of film and those two shots and consider how editing can create things that are greater than the sum of its parts. And that can be considered. Filming a process. So you could look at how to do something very, very simple. It could be as simple as taking the top of a water bottle in 3 shots, and that would be a minute long. Very, very simple, small exercises. Filming a mood. So like filming the mood perhaps of a place. Perhaps they wanted to go into, I don't know, a church or a particular park or something and work out how the language of film can be used to convey the mood of that place. And then how to construct things through found footage, speaking to the second possibility for summative exercise, which would be how to download footage from YouTube, how to download footage from, I don't know, SoundCloud or other internet sources, and collate and present assets in a way which could create that kind of final summative assessment piece. So that could just be getting a couple of different assets from the internet and putting them together and providing a little piece of narration just to tie those things together to start thinking about how a found footage documentary might operate. And so what would an exemplar sort of lesson in this look like, given all that we've just talked about? So it would include roundtable discussions to consider the students' work from the given exercise of the previous week. So they would go away, they would do whichever formative exercise pertained to that particular week or couple of weeks perhaps, and then they would bring those things back. The teacher would lead then a roundtable discussion between the other students where they would look at each other's work, consider it, talk about it, and through that would get some ideas for their own use of film form. It's a very common technique through film studies in higher education, not often employed at the A-level level, but I don't see any reason why not, and I never have. So I think it's something that could really be beneficial to this kind of film studies at that level. Encouraging students to critique their own filmmaking practices through comparison and discourse, introducing the week's exercise through the study of a Spanish film text. So that would be the other side of it, when you would have the students coming back and considering the work that they've just done and learning that way. You would also perhaps be, say, for filming a process, showing the piece from Motorcycle Diaries where Che Guevara fixes up his motorbike, and considering how film form is used in that way to present the space and the temporal aspect of that process, before the students would then go away to film their own little process of just like a minute long, very short, before then bringing that back and again considering it with the rest of the group, which would then spur on the next exercise. And of course, working always towards the final summative assessment here, which is working on the pre-production of the final summative film. And by pre-production, I mean finding their subject, perhaps creating a storyboard, collating any assets they might need, considering things like form and length and equipment and all the kind of technical considerations and pedagogical considerations that go into creating the final summative assessment. So kind of always working towards that final point. So checking how I'm doing for time here, not too bad. Okay, just quickly, there's a few Spanish language film texts. This is the EdXL list from last year, and you can see the kind of stuff that tends to get taught here. You know, Motorcycle Diaries, Pan's Labyrinth, you could look at Manchura, these kinds of things, Volva. So, you know, these are sort of the kinds of films that you could use, and there are numerous examples of protagonists, processes, mood pieces, and all the kind of components that you would need that could be easily plucked out of the current A-level film texts, or again, we could look to expand these in a number of ways, but this is the kind of stuff that tends to get taught at the moment. There are a few considerations around this that I can see people would be understandably kind of concerned about. So finally, I just wanted to consider some of those really. The first, I suppose, would be teaching film. If you've got modern language teachers, how can they be expected to actually teach film form, many of whom may not have an enormous amount of familiarity with it? To that, I would say that the kinds of film form that we're looking to teach here would be very much on the the basic level. There's a book that often gets quoted in these contexts called Film Art by Borwell and Thompson that every student studying film studies is required to buy in their first week. And all the stuff we're talking about here would be kind of chapter one. It would be very, very rudimentary thoughts around framing, pans, tilts, shots, little bits of editing, but it really wouldn't go much beyond that. Available equipment is another one. You know, do schools have the equipment necessary to be able to facilitate this? And again, to that, I would say that everything we're asking them to do here could be achieved with a smartphone and the TikTok app. And I think most students of an A-level age these days are probably far more familiar with those things than people sometimes imagine, and in many ways more so than people of our age, I would argue. So I think the expertise to kind of do these kinds of things relatively unproblematically exists now as just a level of knowledge that young people have. Of course, you couldn't rely on that necessarily, but in cases where you couldn't rely on that, many schools do have some audio-visual equipment as part of that. You'd only need a camera or two, and something like Adobe Premiere, the editing suite, Adobe is more than happy to provide to educational institutes for very, very little money, of course, hoping to breed a new generation of editors that use their software. So it can be sourced very, very cheaply these days, and for very little hassle. Access to Spanish-speaking protagonists would be another concern around that. And as I've said, that's definitely why we would want to have an option that can be done in the found footage space to not disadvantage students who may be in areas where Spanish centres, cultural centres, that kind of thing aren't quite as prevalent. And then assessing film as text. How can markers be expected to mark students on film formalism, where as if it were a textual piece of work? And again, I would say that we can think through the minutiae of this, but I think that there's a sense that we would only be asking for very, very basic skills to be presented here. We would be looking at, have they filmed their subject with objects in the background that convey that subject place or what they want to say about them? Is the editing competent in the most basic ways? We really wouldn't be going too heavily into this stuff in the way you would in higher education here. So in conclusion, I think that by offering more optionality within a new Spanish A-level, we could increase the take-up of the subject, as well as providing a clearer path from A-level Spanish to the specializations within modern language courses in universities. And I think that I believe that filmmaking in Spanish would provide a way to integrate Spanish and the study of film form in a way which would provide students a diverse set of skills that students would be keen to develop through further and higher education. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks very much indeed. No, that's great. That's absolutely fantastic, Owen. We've got lots of things there and a question in the chat as well. We'll come back to some of those issues, but you've given a really clear sense of how that could be integrated. We'll move on to our next speaker. Dr. Sanderberg teaches Spanish, French, and German at Westminster School. He studied French and linguistics in his native Amsterdam, and in his late 20s, he fell in love with Spanish and spent 7 summers working as a tour guide in Latin America. He's also traveled widely in Spain. 15 years ago, he moved to England, where he embarked upon a part-time BA, Spanish and Portuguese at Berg, was followed by a PhD on the 17th century novella writer Maria de Sayas. His thesis was published by Legenda in 2019. He's also translated a variety of literary and academic texts, among others, a book on El Greco, Candide, Chrétien de Troyes, Lancelot, and Elichot's novella Cheese. He's going to be speaking to us today about the possibility of integrating science and technology in Spanish. Over to you, and thanks very much, Sander, for your presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm trying to share this, so I hope it works this way. Can you all see my little head in the corner and the rest above?
Yes, I can. Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, so I will talk to you a little bit about, share some of my thoughts on the science and technology possible addition to the Spanish syllabus. I'm not in no way promoting it. It's just to me, it's a thought experiment. And when we discussed this a while ago, I realized how much actually, in some way or shape, I already do, and I want to share that with you. That's mainly what I want to do. So some background, apologies for repetition. You may have heard some of this before, but this all comes out of some opinion surveys that Stephen Hart did with Spanish A-level students and also first-year students at University of Spanish. And one of the things that came out is they don't read enough. It shouldn't surprise anyone. And that Spanish A-level students prefer speaking and topics within the syllabus to literature and film. And some of them didn't always say this explicitly, but are put off by the idea of film. I certainly have that experience that people go, oh, it's a bit like English, it's my least favorite thing. I like to be able to speak Spanish, but don't want to analyze films or books. And some don't choose Spanish at all for A-level because they think it doesn't fit their career path. They say things like, I want to be a medic, so I can't don't see the point of doing Spanish, even though I really like it. Now the questions are, how can we attract students to do the A-level Spanish, more of them, and how can we make sure that those who choose it are prepared for a course at university? Now, one thing I was thinking about when I put together this slideshow is it's easier to attract students if schools offer 4 A-levels. If they only offer 3, it becomes a lot harder, I think, to offer it, to entice students to who want to be medics or do science and technology or something else at university, where they don't think about doing Spanish, to do Spanish as a fourth option. If you offer 4 options as a school, you have much more room to negotiate or to entice and convince pupils to do that. And in fact, in my experience, I have always had very good medics doing Spanish A-level because they don't need 4 A-levels to do, and that's at university. Okay, all that is a preamble. What I want to look at is to add science and technology to the A-level syllabus. This is the current A-level syllabus. We have talked about this before. And Owen Williams also mentioned this, but right now I looked at the AQA syllabus. The core content consists of 3 points: social issues and trends, political and artistic culture, grammar, and then there's an option which counts for 20%, which is consists of 2 lists, an A and a B list of texts and films, and they have to write on at least 1 text and then 1 film or another text. The proposal is to add another option. Alongside this, you could have business and economy or filmmaking, but it would be within that 20% area to add something there. The assessment at the moment consists of 3 papers: a listening, reading, and writing paper with responses in Spanish on spoken and written passages, and 2 translations, which I actually think is a very good addition to the A-level syllabus. The Spanish to English and English to Spanish, that you can do very interesting things there, but I don't want to go there right now. The second paper is writing, 2 questions on which they have to write in Spanish. As I said, it's either on 2 texts or a text and a film. And paper 3 is the oral, individual research project. I'd like to do the pre-U right now, and then a discussion on 1 of 4 themes. Now, the proposal would be to add to assessment 2, the writing paper, 2 to 4 questions. Initially, I thought of 2 because that's what they do on the film and the text. I have 2 questions on the film, each film, and 2 questions on each text. But then I thought, well, maybe you want to broaden it out, because if you have a whole range of subtopics within, or topics within science and technology, you don't want to limit yourself to only having 2 questions, or you could have 5 questions covering a range of interests from the pupils. And that's exactly what they do right now at the pre-U in Spanish and other languages, the pre-U paper 3, for those of you who are familiar with that. And what they have to do in this paper 3, and what the proposal would be, my proposal would be, is to have a discursive essay of the same length as the literature of the film essay, actually quite short. I'd like it to be slightly longer, but you don't want to put people off and have an imbalanced series of assessments. And what they'd have to do is they have to come up with a discursive essay, something that they don't do. It's not analytical, you're not analyzing a film, you need to convince someone of points that you have. And I'm not entirely sure how this will pan out, but I sort of imagine that they will still have to do one other of the options, i.e. a film or filmmaking or business or another text, and do this alongside. But that's that's down the line to be discussed, I guess. So the assessment, to go back to that, the assessment would be a discursive essay, which is a new element, not currently on the syllabus, in which they have to argue a case, defend an informed opinion, which is, I think, is a very useful skill in life to be able to do this in a foreign language. And a good way to prepare this would be to organize class debates. So in my experience, people really like this, and some unexpected people sometimes really latch onto this and become very, very good. And it's exactly these kinds of polemic issues that you can debate. And I have in the past often debated things that tie into science and technology. Another useful thing to do in preparation in the course of the teaching is to get them to write essays, discursive essays on more generic questions, like, have advances in technology made us any happier, or are there any limits to the power of technology, or how do you think technology and science will influence the way we live in the future, or what are positive and negatives? All these kinds of things can easily lead to an entry-level discursive essay before you then go into more specific issues. Now, talking about which the specific issues are, of course, topic related. Currently on the AQA syllabus, there's only one subtopic I could find that has a ring of science and technology in it. So that would have to be excluded from this because it's already covered. There's the cyberspace, la influencia de Internet en las redes sociales, los móviles inteligentes. So you can't do that, but there's lots you can do. A brief look at the current pre-U syllabus, which is on its way out to pre-U, lists the following things that fit really well with this topic: medical advances, scientific and technological innovation, the environment, conservation, pollution. So putting these things together, you get something like this. These would be topic areas that aren't currently covered elsewhere, as far as I can see, within the science and technology component. You can look at medical advances, genetics and stem cells, treatment of disease and its future. You can throw in a historical perspective and do something on Galen and the humoral theory, which I did the other day. They were actually in a French lesson, but it was good fun. You can look at Spanish and South American medics, like Ramón y Cajal, or you can look at the whole Cuban doctors phenomenon. Another big topic could be scientific and technological innovation. Again, you can start with a historical perspective, talk about the Industrial Revolution, nanotechnology, robotics. Another big topic could be the environment, pollution and conservation, climate change, nuclear power, renewable energy, lots of debate, lots of interesting things that you can discuss within that, those areas. Further topics that you could consider including artificial intelligence and augmented reality, with subtopics on dystopian visions of society, machine learning, applications, gaming, the metaverse. Space exploration, I thought, would be interesting too. You could look at the space race and the future of space exploration, commercialization and militarization of space, space junk, evolution and human biology you could look at. Again, start with a historical perspective maybe, evolution of humans, and then you can get into much more polemic issues of race and ethnicity. So where do you get the material from? So supposing you have all of this, right? So you have medical advances, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 big topic areas. Where on earth do you get the material from? Well, my first thought was that I'm not sure they have to all come from, they have to be in Spanish, obviously, but I'm not sure they all have to be rooted in Spain or in a Spanish-speaking country. I mean, they already learn about culture, history, politics, current affairs, and all these other things elsewhere in the syllabus. So, of course, sometimes if you talk about the Industrial Revolution, you may want to look at how this panned out in Spain or in parts of Latin America. But if you look at the, say, space race, you don't have to then look really hard and at Spanish astronauts, if there are any. Although if there are any, you might want to include an interview with them. But my thought would be it's not necessarily the case. It has to be based on Spanish-speaking countries, because what you want to do is you want to attract pupils who are interested in science and technology and who want to talk about this in Spanish and read about it in Spanish and listen to things about it in Spanish. They want to combine their interest in Spanish with their interest in science and technology, not necessarily the science and technology of a Spanish-speaking country. So what you're essentially doing here is you commit what people call CLIL, so the content and language integrated learning, whereby you learn things about biology and about science and about medicine through Spanish, through the medium of Spanish. And already this sort of happens in the current syllabus. I noticed that geographers, when it comes to some aspects of the syllabus, already have a head start because they know about immigration and all that. So, oh, I know this. I know how this works. We did this in geography the other day, and the same may happen with biology pupils, students, or scientists, and that's only good because that head start. That they may have a head start in terms of knowledge, but that they don't have the joy of transposing all that into Spanish. Okay, so go back. Where do you get your material from? Well, newspapers, magazines, websites, chapters of existing textbooks. There will be stuff already out there. But I also thought you could include passages from novels and non-fiction books. Just things that came into my head when I was writing this. Paula by Allende has Daughter in Coma. There's passages that you could look at, people, with phonetics. Sacomano, really quirky, I'm not sure if anyone knows this, it's a very quirky little novella I picked up a couple of years ago, set in the future in Buenos Aires. It's quite a dystopian little work. You can look at that as sort of surveillance helicopters and dogs and stuff. It's quite scary and interesting and weird. But you can find texts that are fictional or non-fictional that you can use rather than just relying on the media. For listening, you can look at online videos and podcasts. YouTube has oodles. TED Talks are very interesting. I found a podcast called Ciencia para Escuchar, which has short little 30-minute episodes on scientific things in Spanish. And there are documentaries or fragments from films. I'm thinking about Home. I'll show you a bit later on. It's a great documentary about the history of the Earth. Hablo con ella. There's medical things there, and there's discussions about donation of organs. Mar Adentro, and then actually the way, I think Camino, and there's another film about, it's quite a sad film about a girl. I think if I remember correctly, she's from an Opus Dei family, and then she's very ill, and then she ends up dying. There's a lot of illness and disease and all that. But if you pick out the right passages, you could turn this into a lesson. Okay. Some examples of the things I've done, and actually all I've done is I went through my folder of texts that I have done over the years. I haven't done anything extra, but I was, with this in mind, I trawled through and I looked at the following things. I once did an article called Cuando la tecnología se enferma o efectos de la globalización en Latinoamérica o Kingle y la desaparición de las librerías. Basta venir un pueblo solar participativo. They're all things I found online, sometimes because I was reading that newspaper at the time, usually because I was looking for something. I don't regularly read La Nación, but in this case I was looking for tecnología, typed it in a few things, and soon I came across this article, and it was actually quite a good and interesting article, and I turned it into a lesson. Other things I did, I remember Neanderthal, that was actually one I actually read when I was reading El País, and I thought this is such an interesting article. That should make an excellent lesson, and I've been milking it ever since. The same with the Ultimo Hombre de Tribu Amazonica. I think I heard about this in another language, and I thought, well, that would make a good lesson. Let's see if we can find anything in Spanish about this last man of the tribe. I'm not sure if you've heard about this. It's not so long ago. They found this indigenous person. They filmed from the air, and he was chopping down a tree with a stone axe, and didn't want to be contacted by anyone, and they thought he was the last man of his tribe. Anyway, that's how I come across things. And just finish off with, I thought I'd give you some examples. I'm not going to read all these things, but just to see what these texts look like. Yeah, this is probably my favorite. Is the Neanderthal. About the idea of gene technology will make it possible for us to resurrect extinct animals. So you can, the woolly mammoth could be resurrected, but you could also do the same with humans. You could have Neanderthals being resurrected, and then you can have woolly mammoths, and you can maybe create a park somewhere in Siberia where you have real no-fooling Neanderthals chasing real no-fooling woolly mammoths. But then again, if we can, should we? Is it ethical? What are the problems there? How should we treat Neanderthals if they ever were alive? And so it's a super interesting text that has interesting vocabulary, and it poses very interesting and pertinent questions that you can then debate. And what I did with this text is I gave him questions in Spanish, easy ones, and then more harder questions in English. And I think I did a backwards translation. So I created the text in English with this text in mind, that they then had to translate. There's lots you can do. This also is more sort of slightly low level. The other texts I normally do in the upper sixth, so year 13. This one is better in, say, year 12. It's easier. It's about techno stress, that we always walk around with our phones, and it just brings stress to us and all that. So that's a good one to do. There's also quite a cool text, I thought, about a village in the north of Spain that was abandoned and then repopulated by hippies, although they don't call themselves hippies. And it's all about renewable energy, contact with nature, and also the rural exodus and participatory villages. How do you run a village like that? But it's also actually quite an interesting text as well. So far the text, and here I hope this will work. There's some videos. Now I need to see if they work, and I'm not so sure they do. I tried them earlier on. No, I may have to go back to basic and do it in a different way. I'm sorry about this. So it was working on it.
I suppose if they don't work, we could obviously put those on the we could send that to.
Yeah, so quite fun. So yeah, let's see if it can. I'm sharing this other screen. So I'll come out of this one, and I'll start sharing again if that's okay. Unless you want to desktop. Yeah, you can all see this now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yes, for some reason, because I think they were working before. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's okay. I'll just do.
Well, I think what we can do, Sander, is let's send that information to people, and I wonder if we could sort of just.
Okay, I do just a very brief. I won't show you all the rest, but just very quickly. There's a video on the Matabanero, this village. This is a fragment from the Camino. This is a fun thing I found on TED. This is another real TED talk, and this is my favorite. I love this thing I showed every year. I'm not sure if people have seen this. It's a Spanish version of this video by Ignacio Bertrand.
De girarse hacia la luz del sol para captar su energía. Es uno de los más grandes antepasados de todas las especies de plantas de ayer y de hoy. Esta pequeña bacteria y sus miles de millones de descendientes cambiarán el destino de nuestro planeta. Transformarán. Ella nos ha permitido alimentar el doble de seres humanos del planeta, pero también ha reemplazado la diversidad por la estandarización. Ha permitido ofrecer a muchos que descubren nuevas especies que no teníamos idea de que existieran. Insectos, aves, mamíferos.
And so forth. It's an absolutely beautiful film. Yeah, so that's, yeah, I thought I'd share that with you. Home by Ignacio Bertrand, fantastic voiceover, lots of scientific vocabulary, very interesting ideas. It's very good. So yeah, that's so just some thoughts I thought I'd share with you. I can't hear you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's fantastic, Sander, to give us a sense of what that would look like. And I think I've seen those videos as well. I think one could see how that could really work well. Thank you so much for that. We're going to move straight on to David Walker, who's head of modern languages at Kingswood School in Bath. He's especially interested in Spanish language and Latin American literature. He runs a thriving modern languages program at Kingswood School, and he's currently involved in preparing a new course on business Spanish for his students, which will be offered in the coming year. And the idea is that he would talk a little bit about that course and why he wanted to put that together, so that we can get a sense of the options which are out there in terms of a proposal. So David, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, for asking me to talk as well. And I just, as an aside, I was very flattered at that picture you put of me. I don't know where you got that from, but it was that was me in my better days. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Essentially, the rationale for it is a course I've been thinking about for a while. I'd often thought to myself, and I think other A-level language teachers have thought similar to me, that the A-level course, it doesn't always appeal to a lot of our GCSE pupils who are good enough to carry on with the language, but for whom perhaps the content of the A-level isn't necessarily the most appropriate, thing for them. We have a lot of students who are good at languages, but perhaps often say things like, well, I don't really want to, do we have to study literature? Do we have to do a film? Do I have to study, and so forth? I think they could be quite overwhelmed sometimes by the amount of content in the A-level course. And from experience, there is a lot to cover, a lot of different things, which can be off-putting for some students. And so we thought about what other courses might there be just to get more pupils carrying on with a language. Because ultimately, of course, I want them to do A-level, but I want more kids just carrying on with a language, there are not many avenues for that in the sixth form. It's either the A-level or nothing. So I did a bit of research and asked a few different schools over the country, and there was this accreditation in language for business course, which is run, and there are around 20 schools, I think, that are doing it across the country. So I wrote to some of those schools to get some information about the course and how it was going, and I got lots of positive feedback. They'd had strong uptake, so did a bit more investigation. And, essentially our numbers at Kingswood have been up and down, I'm sure similar to a lot of people in different schools. I mean, this year, currently we've got 15 doing A-level, which is actually pretty good. For 15 doing Spanish, there's about 8 doing German, 8 doing French, and about 6 doing German. But my subject is Spanish. I'm head of Spanish and head of languages, but that's pretty good. But then this year we've got 6 doing it, so it goes up and down. And it seems to me that, and speaking to the head of sixth form, obviously STEM subjects are always incredibly popular. Geography is a big one that a lot of people are doing at A-level now. I think that ties in with the whole people being more aware of the environment or caring about it, younger people. So it's about recruiting people, for me, to carry on with languages at A-level or this alternative. So I thought I'd just show you a little bit about the course. We haven't started it yet. We started it September. We had parents' evening last night, and it was interesting to just gauge, from what we can see, there's around 10 pupils at the moment who want to sign up for the Spanish business language course. And we've got around 10 to 12 interested in look like they're going to do the A-level. So for me, that's a win, because we're going to end up having potentially 20 to 22 pupils carrying on with Spanish at some level, whereas in previous years we might have 6, 7, 8. So that's a really positive thing for me. So we're also offering it in French and German, of course, as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. This is the PowerPoint which I showed to the pupils. So it is aimed at pupils. So I apologize, if it seems a little bit simplistic in some ways. And keeping in mind also that we've not taught the course yet. I need to learn about how to teach the course. Once I find out how many pupils have signed up, then I'll obviously go attend some seminars, get some ideas of what we're going to do, how we're going to run the course. But we've sold it to parents and to pupils like this. Well, the first bit is raising employability opportunities for younger people. We've obviously spent a lot of time emphasizing how a language further down the line could benefit them in whatever they end up doing, whatever job they end up doing. So what's appealing about the course, I think, for a lot of pupils is it is using a language in business-like scenarios. So simple things like phone calls, showing someone around your company, going to meetings abroad, etc. The kind of things anecdotally I do hear about from their parents when they're going abroad to work, and they'll often say to me things like, oh, I wish I'd studied harder at language because I'm the only one who doesn't speak one when I go to whatever country. There are a couple of different options for the course in terms of how it's awarded, how you're marked. You can actually just do the course and get a certificate and not have to do any examinations in it, which in some ways it could appeal to the maybe the lesser able pupils. So quite often the A-level, really, if you're not getting a grade 7 at GCSE, it's probably not a good idea to do A-level. And therefore you exclude pupils who get 5s, who get 6s sometimes, who are quite enjoy the language, but have got what can they do? They can't carry on necessarily at the A-level because they're going to be studying literature, things that maybe are a little bit too challenging, but they just want to carry on with their language. So something like level 2, where you don't have to do, you're studying the language, but you don't necessarily have to do any qualification at the end, might appeal. But there's also the option to do assessments and an extra module in the summer term, whereby you get 16 UCAS points and you get a proper qualification, which is recognized by the, I can't remember the Institute of Business, I can't remember the actual name, apologies, but it is recognized. So I'll skip that bit. But in terms of time commitment, from the schools I've spoken to, it's 1 to 2 hours of teaching per week. And our idea is obviously that it goes alongside 3 A-levels. Now, the majority of students we teach end up doing 3 A-levels. Sometimes they start with 4, but they invariably go to 3 after 3 or 4 weeks. So they could even pick it up after 3 or 4 weeks. At the moment, we offer EPQ, and I think there's another sort of computer-related course we're doing as well, which is similar. So it's a good option for those pupils who want to do 3 A-levels and something else. Instead of the EPQ, maybe they do this in French, German, or Spanish. So these are just some examples, these slides, of the kind of topics you do. So I'm just going to skip a little bit, but there's a happy lady talking a Volkswagen, very simple German there, I'm sure, but it's things like functional calls, introducing yourself to a company, explaining who you are, arranging meetings. There's another example writing task, if you can see that, to Hugo Boss, and you might have to, it will give you the details, and you might have to write an application, or even make a call or record yourself giving, imagining you're talking to an employer and giving reasons why you want that job in the target language. Skip that. Things like travel announcements, job profiles, marketing. So I've seen some examples of pupils trying to selling pretend products, which might be quite exciting for kids as well, doing that kind of thing. Sales presentations. As an example there, sort of giving a product presentation, using things like pie charts and graphs in the target language, attending a conference, going to an exhibition. Hopefully the kind of things that you can see, pupils can see a purpose to, and that they might see themselves using one day if they end up working for a company and they're posted abroad, or they need to make a phone call abroad, etc. The kind of things you have to do at the end of the course in June, if you do go on to do the assessment, there's a variety of different tasks. Now, this is just one example. Context: a summer job in the Alps. You're working for Bike King, a mountain bike rental shop, and you have to deal with this order request. So I think that's, quite appealing to a lot of pupils to do this kind of thing. And also, as I said, an important thing for me is it appeals to any level of student. I think that the content, from what I can tell, is absolutely fine for maybe a pupil who's getting a 5 or 6 at GCSE. Another example, marketing internship. You're on a marketing internship for WebQuest, a Spanish company based in Madrid. Your boss has left you an audio message, and you have to interpret that message and make relevant changes and so forth. Oh, there it was, yeah. So as I say, UCAS points are awarded. I'm skipping very quickly through this. I know a lot of it is irrelevant for you to see. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially it, guys. We haven't introduced it yet, but we're looking at doing it well, we are going to do it in September. There's another example there, a sort of project they might have to do. This is for the assessment bit, the level 3, which they do in the summer term. And that's where they have to work independently and complete some kind of project and then present it to the teacher, which you record or you take in if it's a written thing, and it's sent off for external marking. So this one here, you've been asked by your manager to set up a visit to a factory in Lyon for a group for your design team. And then you have these different tasks to do. So quite functional things, which hopefully pupils would find useful. It can be used as well, the course, as part of your Duke of Edinburgh Award. So they can put it, I can't remember what section that qualifies as, a new skill or something. But there are opportunities for residential trips as well. Should we be allowed to, hopefully sometime soon, be able to do those again. So I'm going to stop it there. And if anyone has any questions, please do ask. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer them.
Well, I'd just like to say thanks so much for that. That really came over as something, and what I think is really essential to what we're thinking about at the moment is not only persuading pupils, but persuading their parents. This is something that's come back, and obviously you did that. So we're thinking about the nuts and bolts as well as some of the challenges faced by modern languages and trying to up those numbers. And so, that's something you just mentioned there about could have been 10, but actually probably will be 22 students, not necessarily doing A-level, but continuing. And of course, one of the ideas behind this project is that we at universities need to get on moving ahead with that and bring also these things much more together to make them. And that point about the business scenarios, I thought was great. So I think that the idea here would be, if this all goes well, David, that you'd give us a kind of a template if you think it would work for A-level as well. We'd sort of, that's one of the ideas, and the same with Sanders and also with Owen's idea, that we'd make the A-level more attractive. So therefore we can get some of those students, and I hadn't thought about this, but the geography students who are interested in climate change, we say to them, okay, if you want to talk about that in Spanish, we've got that in the science and technology. So I wondered if I could just then open this up. We haven't got a lot of time left, I'm afraid, but 4 absolutely fantastic presentations about what the new A-level could look like. Now, the idea is that these are presentations, they're proposals. Could I ask if you've sounded out any exam boards? I'm worried about doing that. I wanted to have our own ideas first, but there are some informal soundings that Helen Lawrenson at University College School has looked at, and they are intrigued and they're interested. But I think they want to, they won't give their opinion yet. But what we want to do is to see whether we can put something together. The project itself will end in March, and we'll put together some proposals. I think we've got some good ideas which have come forward based on what we've heard from these surveys. That's what the surveys are saying. And David, you also mentioned about what parents are saying as well. That thing about business scenarios I thought was great. In other words, that you talk about the way that the language is being used, and you quote one of the parents who says, I wish in my business life, I wish I'd actually learned a language because I could then be a lot more proficient at what I'm doing. So I think that all those things are good. Are there any, would anyone like to make a comment, a point? Now, there was one in the chat, which we do need to look at, which was safety concerns, staff training.
Yeah.
That was Tina Lonsdale, technical knowledge. You kind of did address that, Owen, but I wonder if you wanted to say anything more about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it came in before I made some stab at addressing this, but probably not in a explicit enough way. Hopefully, yeah, safety concerns would absolutely have to be regulated in the A-level space, and that would need to be done through some kind of arrangement between the school and, as I think I sort of went into a little bit, some kind of Spanish-speaking cultural or business or religious or charity organization within the locale of the school that was teaching it. And then that would obviously have to be very carefully monitored in terms of providing a safe access for students to Spanish speakers of interest to make these things. And in areas where that wasn't possible, that option should be, I think, removed from students, and it should be very much a case of providing the found footage documentary assessment that I went into a little bit. Yeah, obviously that would be an absolutely paramount concern. In terms of staff training and equipment, like I say, it's staff training. It would definitely suit an organisation that had a modern language teacher that was somewhat au fait with these things in the first place. There is no getting around students who may sign up for this option not knowing really anything about filmmaking, which would absolutely be with their right to do, and then coming to the teacher and saying, I don't know how to format this piece of footage in MP4 to upload to an edit suite. How would you address that? So you'd either need to have a staff member that was on some level au fait with this stuff, or you would need to have an audiovisual partner within the organization that would be able to help out to some degree. I do think that students have quite a high level of technical knowledge at the moment in terms of the stuff that they, students of this age, in terms of the social media that they engage with a lot. I know it's a kind of cliche to say all students of that age just spend their whole lives on social media. That's not entirely true in many cases, but I think it is the case that these kinds of this kind of technical knowledge is ingrained in people of a certain age in a way it wasn't for us at that age. And I think that, like I say, a mobile phone and any number of free apps, you know, Power Director, Splice Quick, KineMaster, all of these are available on the smartphones students have all the time and can be used to do everything that we're suggesting in this course. So I'm not saying that any of that alleviates completely these concerns. I don't think it does. I think that's something that every institution would have to think through quite carefully. But I do think it's a time where this stuff is more feasible and possible to do at A-level than it ever has been. And I do think there are institutions for which this would work because of that.
Good. And could I just jump in there as well? I mean, I think at UCL, we'd be happy as well to put on some courses, which, and, you know, and it might be that Owen might teach some of them if we could be persuaded to do so. He's very, very busy. But it's the sort of thing that we, in terms of this partnership, we'd be happy to do that. In other words, so that you'd sort of learn that skill as well, and you'd allow your students to be using that skill. With regard to Tina's very, very good point, would you need to teach business, film, STEM to all the class? You can't have students choose individual. It might well be the case that the A-level might offer all of these options if we can persuade AQO or others to take this on board. But you as a school might say, actually, I'm going to do the business one. That's the one that really speaks to me. And so I'm going to offer that as well as the film and the literature. That might be a way of looking at it. So it would obviously be simply the choice within schools with regard to that. I think there is a sense, and I certainly feel that at UCL, when we have students who kind of push us towards a certain, and even the parents perhaps. So we, you know, that there might be ways in which the students would say, well, perhaps making a film is something that I'd like to do. Would foreign language teachers need to have a degree in any of these topics? It's like Spanish for specific purposes. I don't think so. I think that the presentations today suggest to me that these are things that, certainly in topics and certainly in business, I think that Sander might be able to speak about this, but also David's unfortunately had to go now, but he's actually just added that on. It's an add-on. It's like Spanish for specific purposes. I think that's true. But the idea is to take, as it were, build on some of that popularity and to put it into Spanish as an A-level so that we can attract some of those students. There are quite a few of them based on the survey who A-starred or level students who are doing STEM or medical studies, but would like to do Spanish, enjoyed it. And so, you know, this would be a way of offering that. It has to be the way to look at it. We can't teach separate modules to individual students. No, I think that's right. So, but that's why we wanted to do this today, so that we wanted to get some feedback from you as well, to get a sense whether you would say, okay, why don't you try and put it together? We'll see how, and whether you would support it, or whether you would our sense, certainly at UCL, in terms of some languages, is that we are finding it more difficult, or the feedback we get from some schools is that there's not as many students going through the system. So it's just really to think about that partnership, and so that we can, you know, offer something. There was an Ofsted report that I read that really shocked me, said that students thought that the curriculum for foreign languages was pretty boring. I thought that was unfair. I don't think it is myself. I did it myself many years ago, but that's, you know, that's the kind of thing. It's not as exciting as geography. It's not as exciting as history. It's not as exciting apparently as physics. You know, but so these are things that are coming out that we're sort of trying to address, as it were. And the students could already do the STEM as they're, yeah, presume if they're, yes, they are doing that. And again, Helen Lawrenson has mentioned that students are voting with their feet on this, so that some of them are taking Spanish with physics and chemistry. But we also want to get those students who perhaps need to do the 3 in science and would also, you know, like to continue, but would like to make it a little bit easier for themselves by putting some of their knowledge of science and thinking about that. I mean, I know lots of people who work in Spanish laboratories on either COVID-19 or lots of other things. I know people who work in laboratories with scientists in Chile as well. And this is, you know, they need their language as well. So this is really part of an ongoing thing, why we don't need to split them up, as it were. They can continue to do that when they get to university and do their PhD and become scientists. What's wrong with a scientist actually already being fluent in Spanish as well? What's wrong with a doctor, a UK doctor, also being fluent in Spanish? We also need people to write on film, I suppose, and on literature. And I'm not saying anything against them, because that's essentially what I do. But just wanted to get some feedback from you. I'd like to say, if there aren't any other comments and suggestions, I'd like to say if universities accept with the language, that would help. Yes, well, we do. Actually, at UCL, we say that only students who have a language can apply. So we've stuck our neck out on that one. But what we could do is push forward with this as well, and make language a dynamic you know, addition to their curriculum. And I think I agree with that from Tina's point there. But as I say, we have done that at UCL. If there are no other comments, I'd like to say thank you so much to our speakers today, to Ignacio, to Sander, to Owen, and also to David. They're absolutely fantastic. And it shows the vibrancy and the vitality within the UK and interest in Spanish, and also with Ignacio's leadership with regard to promoting the value of Spanish across the world. You know, we're in safe hands, as it were. So thank you very much to everyone for the presentations today, and also for your comments, which are very positive, and we'll bear those all in mind, and we will push forward. And on the 22nd of March, we'll be holding a Modern Languages Open Day, in which we will have Spanish, French, German, and also we'll be having Chinese as well. Did I say French, German? Yes, Spanish and Chinese. So and Italian as well. So we will be having that on the 22nd of March. But we'll send out information about that. But in the meantime, thank you very much again. And this has been recorded, so it will actually be, we'll upload that if that's acceptable to the speakers. So thank you again for the presentations, and look forward to hearing more about this in the future. Please tell your friends about this possibility and colleagues, and see what they think. Okay. So,
thank you, Ian, for hosting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again, everyone, for coming along. Okay, thank you. Right, goodbye.